I want to take up in volume 13, December 18, 1921. And the theme here is that peace is the springtime for the soul. So to start us off, I want to give you Isaiah 26, verse 3. You will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. So that's actually the theme we're actually going to be dealing with. And it's expressed very well by Isaiah there in chapter 26, verse 3. So Luisa said she was feeling very oppressed because of the privation of Jesus. And when he eventually came, he began speaking to her about peace. My daughter, he said, what is it? Because she's been having trouble waiting for him. I see a mood and a shadow in you that render you dissimilar from me. I think that's a very important point, that he can find moods in us that are very unlike him. That's our disturbance about whatever we're disturbed about. And he doesn't want it. He's been telling us since volume 1 that he absolutely does not want any disturbance in the depths of our being, not at all. So I see a mood and a shadow in you which render you dissimilar from me. And it breaks the current of beatitude or happiness, which has almost always existed between me and you. Now, considering all that Luisa has been through, from volume 1 to where we're at now in volume 13, it is totally amazing that Jesus tells her that the current of happiness has almost never been broken between them. That means that she has the peace that passes all understanding and guards the heart and the mind in Christ Jesus. That's Philippians 4:7. Everything is peace in me, he says. Therefore, I do not tolerate in you even one shadow which may shade your soul. Peace is the springtime of the soul. All virtues bloom in peace. They all grow and smile like plants and flowers at the rays of the sun in springtime, which disposes all things of nature to produce, each one its own particular fruit. If it wasn't for the spring which shakes the plants from the torpor of cold with its enchanting smile, and clothes the earth with a flowery mantle that calls everyone to admire it with its sweet enchantment, the earth would be a horrid place, and the plants would end up just withering. What would we do without the wonderful green carpet that's upon the earth and the 40 shades of green that we find in all of the plants, and then the extraordinary full range of colour that we find in the flowers? There would be nothing out there to attract our attention. So Jesus said, peace is the divine smile. Now here is another major key for us to discern where we are at in the divine will. Peace is the divine smile which shakes the soul from its torpor. Like celestial springtime, it shakes the soul from the cold of its passions, from weaknesses, from thoughtlessness, and from all the other stuff. And with its smile, it makes all flowers bloom more than a flowery field, and it makes all plants grow, through which the celestial farmer is pleased to stroll to pick the fruits, to make them for his food. Therefore, the peaceful soul is my garden, in which I enjoy and amuse myself, he says. So he needs us to have peace so that even he can come to us, because he is peace. Isaiah 9, chapter 6, declared that he was the Prince of Peace. On the day he was born, the angels proclaimed him as the King of Peace. Okay, so let me give you many references. I want to give you John 14:27. The peace I give you is not the peace that the world gives. It's heavenly beatitude. John 16:33. Again, it's not the peace of the world that I give you. It's this heavenly beatitude. John 20 verse 19. 1 Corinthians 1:3. 1 Corinthians 7:15. Ephesians 2:14, and so on and so forth. And we're going to read that Jesus is peace. Peace is light. Jesus is light. Therefore, peace is light. Therefore, peace is our experience of God in us. Let me also give you Acts chapter 10, verse 36, Romans 1:7, Romans 3:17, Romans 5:1, Romans 8:6, Romans 10:15, Romans 14:17, Romans 15:33, and the beginning of all the letters in the New Testament. That the God of peace, or the peace of God, would be with us. Okay, so the gift of peace is all over the New Testament. The King of Peace came to give us his own peace. So if he finds us unpeaceful, then there is that dissimilarity between us and him, which he's not able to take. He wants us to be like him. So he goes on and he tells Luisa, peace is light. And everything that the soul thinks, says, and does is light that she emanates. Now this light is God himself moving in us and through us and out of us to others. And again, I must give you Matthew 5:14 there, because he tells us that we are meant to be the light of the world, but we can't have it if we don't have his peace reigning and dominating in us. And therefore, it's that peaceful light that goes out to give life to everything else. Peace is light. And everything that the soul thinks, says, and does is light that she emanates. And the enemy cannot get close to her because he feels struck, wounded, and dazzled by this light. Now that light is God, and it's the divine will operating in us and through us. And he is forced to flee so as not to get blinded. So you can see, therefore, why Jesus wants this peace established in us, and he wants it never, ever to shift, because the more this peace reigns in us, the less the demon can get near us. We have total protection. And that's why he says in the next paragraph, peace is dominion, it's reigning. You reign not only over yourself, but also over others. So before a peaceful soul, everyone remains either conquered, confused, or humiliated. Because the peaceful soul is in a position that none of the others are in. And the light of God is coming from you, through you, to all the others. And depending on their disposition vis-a-vis the presence of God, they will either be conquered, confused, or blinded, or humiliated, as the Lord says. Therefore, the other people let themselves be dominated, remaining as friends, or they go away confused, unable to sustain the dignity and the imperturbability and the sweetness of a soul who possesses peace. Now, I love that imperturbability. Now, I know it's a big word. But it means that the sign of God's presence is actually there in you. No matter what is going on in the universe, God is peace personified. And if we have the divine will absolutely registered, reigning permanently in us, well, that peace that passes all understanding is in us as well. Now, as we go towards that point of complete surrender, the peace in us grows and grows and grows and grows. just as the more you pull back the curtains or lift the blinds in the morning time, the more you pull back the curtains or lift the blinds in the morning time, the more the light enters the room. And so the level of peace that we have is actually one of the signs of discernment for us. Peace is dominion, not only over oneself, but also over others. So, before a peaceful soul, they all remain either conquered, confused, or humiliated. Therefore, they either let themselves be dominated remaining as friends, or they leave confused, unable to sustain the dignity and the imperturbability, the sweetness of a soul who possesses peace. Now, what that reminds me of is Maximilian Kolbe, on the day he offered his life for a man he didn't know. There was shocking fear in the place. Fear was reigning because the enemy uses fear all the time to dominate us. And since a prisoner had escaped, the guards were going to kill 10 others to make sure that nobody else would escape. And so everybody was in mortal fear. And as the men were arbitrarily chosen out of the crowd, one of the men cried out about his wife and children. And immediately Maximilian Kolbe stepped forward and he said, "Excuse me, that man has a wife and children. I am a priest. I don't have a family. I will go instead of him." And the survivors of the camp said that at that moment fear went into the guards and came out of the prisoners. And the guards were really terrified. They could not believe that this very peaceful, serene person was imperturbable in the face of death and the horrible deaths that they were able to give people. So they said that for a few moments there was total silence, complete silence, until the commander got his breath back and ordered him to stand in line. But the survivors also said that as a result of this act of extraordinary freedom, this act of extraordinary divine love that this man made, and this extraordinary sign of peace and sweetness, that the camp was never ever so bad again. That one act of Maximilian Kolbe changed everything. And this is the thing that we need to understand about divine acts. They do change everything. We're making a real difference. Even the most perverted people feel the power that the soul containing this peace has. And that's exactly the story I've told you about Auschwitz. This is why I glory so much in having myself called the God of peace and the Prince of Peace. So that's Isaiah 9:6, and it's Luke chapter 2 as well, where Jesus was proclaimed as the Prince of Peace. There is no peace without me. Now, what politicians and governments and countries call peace is merely a cessation of hostilities. And it's merely a case of having arrived at a point where they can all sort of coexist while hating each other, all wanting the same things for the same reason, but all wanting to have everything and dominating everybody else. That's not peace. There's nothing to do with it. Jesus says, there's no peace without me. I alone possess it, and I give it to my children. That's what he said in John 14:27. I give you my peace. It's his gift to us. And it's not the world's peace, he said, that I give you. I give you my peace. That means that you will be in a relationship of union, of love with God, a relationship of correct relationship with yourself, and a relationship of love to your neighbour. And I suppose a correct relationship to yourself is loving yourself properly as well. So it's all love. And Jesus said, there's no peace without me. I alone possess it, and I give it to my children as legitimate children who remain bound as heirs to all my goods. Now, the legitimate children are Romans 8:19, the children through whom God can restore the whole earth. And so he continues, the world and creatures do not have this peace. And what is not possessed cannot be given. We can only give what we have. At the most, they can give an apparent peace which torments them inside. It is a false peace, and it contains a poisonous sip within it. And this poison puts the remorse of conscience to sleep, and it leads one into the kingdom of vice. Well, we have far too much evidence about that in world politics. Therefore, I am true peace, Jesus says. I want to conceal you within my peace so that you may never be disturbed, and that the shadow of my peace, like dazzling light, may keep far away from you anything or anyone who might even shadow your peace. Now, that peace that passes all understanding that Jesus is talking about here, like a dazzling light, that is to experience paradise on earth. Paradise on earth. This is it. That's what everybody wants, but they just don't want it God's way. So let's come to December 22, 1921. And here we're talking about the motivation that we have in doing everything. And Jesus says that the only acceptable motivation for all our thoughts, words, actions, everything is love. And it's love for him. In other words, our entire relationship with God is a relationship of love. So this is a very important message about motivation. Continuing in my usual state, my beloved Jesus made himself seen within a dazzling light. Now you know that dazzling light is the divine will. You know that it is peace. You know that it is love. You know that it is grace. And he said in volumes 1 and 2 that he is faith, he is hope, he is charity. Okay? So this dazzling light is all of those things. He showed himself within a dazzling light, and this light, melting into a rain of light, rained down upon souls. Isn't that absolutely glorious? However, many did not receive this current of light, being as though closed, and the current ran wherever it found souls open to receive it. Now, if you have ever watched a stream becoming a river, you'll see that the water will flow wherever it's allowed to flow. If there are rocks in the way, then the water has to go around the rocks. If it comes to a dead end, it has to stop, but then it will find some other way to get out. And so when the rain of this divine light comes down upon souls, it doesn't always have the freedom to move, and sometimes it has to meander around like the river finding its way. The current ran wherever it found souls open to receive it, just like the water will. And the light that comes to us, even from the sun, will go anywhere that you don't block it from going. My daughter, Jesus said, the current of my grace, which is this rain of light, enters into souls who operate out of pure love. Now here's the secret of the saints. And it mightn't be any harm to put that as a heading. How do you get to sanctity quickly? And that is to operate out of pure love. Now, you've heard me say this many times before, that Saint Therese of Lisieux said that if you pick a pin off the floor out of pure love for God, it is worth all the projects that people can do on the planet from their own will. The motivation is everything. It's not just why that you do it, it's why you do it. You even come across this when you listen to the news media saying that a murder has taken place, but they haven't yet found the motive. And they're not satisfied until they find why this happened. And when they find the motive for the murder, then they can actually solve the mystery. And Jesus is coming straight into the centre of everything. The real issue is why you're doing something. And he's looking for the motive from us as well. He says, the current of my grace enters into souls who operate out of pure love. Now notice pure love. Impure love is, there's a bit of self in it. There's something for me. That's impure. I'm not really loving God. I'm not really serving him. Behind it all, I'm serving myself. An impure motive, for example, would be that I tell myself or you that I'm going to fast tomorrow. And fasting is a good thing. But in the back of my mind, I say, well, I could lose a few pounds, you know. There's the impure motive. I'm not really doing it for God. I'm really doing it in the hopes that I'll lose a few pounds weight. Sad, but unfortunately that's like us. The current of my grace enters into souls who operate out of pure love. Only the motive of loving me keeps souls open to receiving the current of my graces. Now, there you've got the answer to the question. What closes people off from receiving grace and what opens them up to receiving grace? Those who love him will be open to him. Those who don't love him will be closed to him. That tells you how many are closed to him, which is very, very sad. Jesus says, I am love. And of course, anybody who doesn't love is outside of the thing. I mean, I can't remember what saint I do remember now. It's St. Francis of Assisi used to say at the end of his days, love is not loved. Love is not loved. And people were wondering what he was talking about. So, in order for us to truly be able to enter fully into what God is offering us, we have to become love. And then the little flame of love in us leaps into the fire of love that he is, and we become part of him, and he becomes part of us. We possess God, and he possesses us. I am love, he says, and they are love. So they are in continuous currents for me, and I for them. So the continuous currents is this continuous traffic that's going on between us and him. So if you think of John 1:51, just for a moment, the ladder that connects heaven and earth, and the angels of God going up and down this ladder, and Jesus said he was the fulfillment of that. He is the ladder. He is the connection between heaven and earth. And he says that the traffic that's going up and down this ladder is love. Love coming from him to us, and love coming from us back to him, responding and completing the cycle. So there's continuous movements of this love between us and him. On the other hand, those who operate with the human purpose are closed to me. So here's the human will and the me stuff. They're closed to me, he said. Their current is open to all that is human. So they receive the current of what is human. And the frightening thing is that you can have people, men and women, wearing beautiful religious habits, living a completely human life. To me, that's utter tragedy. They've all the circumstances in which to live a divine life, but they could be living a completely human life. One who operates with the purpose of sinning receives the current of guilt. Now we've moved down much further. So we've moved from the high place of love to the middle place of the merely human, and now we've moved into the low place of the area of sin. And so one who operates with the purpose of sinning receives the current of guilt, and the one who operates with a diabolical purpose receives the current of hell. There's the lowest place of all. So the purpose or the motive in operating gives man many different tints. So we have to look at why I'm doing it. And we have to look at it with a radical honesty. So that if there is something in why I'm doing things and they're not really for God, then we've got to let it go. We've got to let go and let God. The motive in operating gives man many different tints. It transforms him into beautiful or into ugly, into light or into darkness, into sanctity or into sin. Whatever the motives are in operating, that is who you are. Wow. Now we've got wonderful discernment here. If I operate in love, I am love. If I operate in selfishness, I am selfish. There you have it. If I operate in sin, I am sin. You are according to your motivations. The book of Proverbs puts it slightly differently. It says, as a man thinks, so is he. Because you see, your motivations will come through your thoughts. Therefore, Jesus says, my current of love and grace and everything does not enter into everyone. And since it is rejected by the souls who are closed to me, it unloads itself more mightily and more abundantly on the souls who are open. And the ones who are fully open can receive the full tsunami of his grace. That's what we have to get to, being completely 100% open to him. And so after this, Jesus disappeared. And later on, he came back to Luisa and he continued. Would you be able to tell me why the sun illuminates the whole earth, he said. He's treated this before many times. Because it's much larger than the earth. And since it is bigger, it has the capacity of covering with its light the whole circumference of the earth, which is smaller. If it were smaller, it would illuminate only part of it, but not all of it. Therefore, smaller things are enveloped and absorbed by bigger things. Now, that's the point that he wants to make. Smaller things are taken up and absorbed by bigger things. So, if my little love is put into the furnace of his love, the smaller thing is taken up and absorbed into the bigger one. Now, my will is the greatest of all virtues, he says. I'm surprised at him calling it a virtue. Therefore, all virtues must remain shrunken and dissolved within my will. Even more, before the power of the sanctity of my will, the other virtues tremble out of reverence for my will. And if without my will, virtues think of doing something great, at the contact with my sanctity and power of the virtue of my will, they realize they've done nothing. There's your John 15:5 again. Without me, you can do nothing. You may appear great in the eyes of the world. And in order to give them the mark of virtues, I am forced to plunge them into the immense sea of my will. Not only has my will primacy over all, but it gives the different tints of beauty to all the virtues. It places on them the divine tints, the celestial glaze, and the dazzling light. Therefore, if the virtues are not covered by my will, they may be good, but they're not beautiful. They're not beautiful with that beauty that enraptures, enchants and enamours both heaven and earth. It's too small, too confined, too human, too ordinary. Afterwards, Jesus transported Luisa outside of herself, and he showed her many channels of water were opening under the sea, which, making their way underground, inundated the foundations of cities. I want to give you Amos 3:7 here. The Lord never does anything without telling his prophets first. Now, the Lord gives Luisa an explanation that I find utterly amazing. We know that there is a water table under the surface of the earth. If there wasn't, you'd have no wells. You'd have no sources of water underneath the earth. And people from the time of Adam have dug wells to find water. Okay, so there's a water table underneath. So watch this. The Lord transported me... The Lord transported me outside of myself and showed me how channels of water were opening under the sea. Now, that's not where you would expect the channels of water to be. And they were making their way underground, and they were going to inundate whole cities. That's incredible. I don't know if that has ever happened. That's just my ignorance now. All I know is about tsunamis. In other words, the ocean coming in on top of cities. And at some place, she said, buildings collapsed. Somewhere else, they made them disappear altogether. As these chasms of water opened and swallowed them into the earth. Wow. When you go back to the book of Exodus and the story of Moses trying to be a go-between between God and the chosen people to try and turn them into a people of God, there were several revolts against Moses and Aaron. And in one of them, there were two men called Dathan and Abiram. And they really thought that they had just as much right as Moses and Aaron to offer the holy incense in the presence of God. They managed to get the people in revolt against Moses and Aaron, and God dealt with it very summarily. And he didn't tell Moses in the beginning what was going to happen. He only told him step by step. It's very interesting to read the story. And the final step was when Moses said to the people, step back from the house of Dathan and the house of Abiram. Step back, he said, step back quickly, step back, because the earth is going to open up and swallow them, and it did. Now, looking at that incident in the Exodus, we know that that was miraculous, but from where we're standing, from understanding the divine will, we know that if God says, I want it, that's it, it happens. So here Luisa is saying that God is going to allow this to happen on the earth at some point. And all afflicted, he said, man doesn't want to stop it. Now, how would man stop the waters of the earth from inundating cities? The only way is through repentance. The only way to stop this epidemic is through repentance. Man does not want to stop it, he said, and my justice is forced to strike him. Many are the cities which will be struck by water, by fire, and by earthquakes. Now, since the year 2000, we're getting used to whole areas being struck by fire. And we watch them in absolute amazement. We're also getting used to the earthquakes. We seem to think that earthquakes are normal. Does anybody know that they keep on increasing? I remember just before the year 2000 coming across a little piece in a newspaper which said that for every decade of the 20th century, particularly in America, that the chastisements, the natural disasters, increased in number and in ferocity for every single decade of the 20th century. Did they get the message? No. So Luisa said to Jesus, "My love, what are you saying? You won't do this." And she said, "I wanted to intercede with him, but he disappeared. That means he doesn't want to know. I'm just letting you know this is going to happen. I don't want you to stop it." So December the 23rd, 1921. One who operates and lives in the divine will gives Jesus the field to issue new works, new love, and new power. This is fantastic. So Jesus said to Luisa, "Daughter of my volition." We now know she's been over 32 years in the divine will. "As you operate and live in my will, you make more new acts come out from within my will." Now, why are they new? It's because a creature is doing them for the first time. And so God incorporates that. "And you give me the field for new works, new love, and new power." How happy I feel that the creature, by living in my will, gives me the field to act. On the other hand, one who does not live in my will folds my arms and renders my will useless for her. His will is not useless for anybody else, but if we don't do this, yes. One who does not live in my will folds my arms and renders my will useless for her. All of us want to do something for the human race. We see it in such dire straits. And Jesus says, you know what to do. You open up to the divine will. You let the divine will operate in you and through you. It's fantastic. On the other hand, one who does not live in my will folds my arms and renders my will useless for her. While my being is led to motion and to work by the irresistible force of my love. God is love. 1 John 4:7. Psalm 145 verse 17. God only ever acts out of love. How does love live? Love lives by giving. So you need to write that down. Love lives by giving everything. It's not really love if you hold something back. That's why in marriage you have to give everything. Love lives by giving. And when love is not given an outlet to sacrifice itself and to give itself, love is completely frustrated. And that's why it's one of the reasons why God gives you a child that demands everything from you, absolutely everything, things you didn't even know you had. Because the love becomes creative. My being, he said, is led to motion and to work by the irresistible force of my love. Only one who lives in my will gives me this free field. A free field is that you give him the space to work. And I animate even the tiniest acts of my divine will. Now, if we fuse ourselves, all of us in all of him all the time, then the tiniest thing, even moving your head, turning around, looking, blinking your eyes, everything, the tiniest thing is animated by him. It's fantastic. And I do not disdain to place the seal of divine power even on the lowliest things, like I've given you an example of. Walking, sleeping, thinking, desiring, praying, everything. This is why I love so much one who lives in my will, and I surround each of her acts with so much grace, with such dignity and decorum, because I want the honour and the glory of my divine work. Therefore, be attentive and think well that if all that you do not do in my will, you will give uselessness to your Jesus. You won't give him a chance to let his love pour out. "Ah, if you knew how idleness weighs on me," he said, "how it saddens me, wouldn't you be more attentive? Wouldn't you respond better?" And then after this, Luisa said, "I was about to close my eyes to sleep, and I said to myself, 'Oh, my sleep too in your will, Jesus. Even more, may my breath be transformed into yours, so that what Jesus did while sleeping, I may do as well.'" And there's a beautiful little good night Jesus prayer. Beautiful. But then, "Did my Jesus sleep?" she asks. And Jesus came back and explained, "My daughter, my sleep was extremely brief." You see, he was God as well as man. He did not have our emotional and physical and mental problems. He did not have the pressures as we experience them. Some of the saints have also slept very little, and they use the hours of the night for their resting in God. But we who need our night's sleep can now rest in God completely in the divine will. But he said, "I did sleep," because Jesus wanted to do everything that human beings should do, and we have to sleep. But he said, "I did not sleep for myself, I slept for them." Everything was for them. And this shows you the extraordinary love that is given to us. As the head, he said, that means as the second Adam, I represented the whole human family. And I had to lay my humanity over all in order to give them rest. So, he's allowing himself this physical sleep. But what he wants to do is to lay his humanity over all creatures who would ever live, past, present, and future, so that we could rest in the Spirit. That we would reach this point of rest. Now, this point of rest is spoken about in the letter to the Hebrews in chapter 4, and it's actually very important to read it. Because one of the things he says was that the people of God in the Old Testament didn't actually find rest. And so rest has been opened up to us in the New Testament, and much more especially in the divine will. I could see, he said, I could see all creatures covered with a mantle of disturbance, of struggle, of restlessness. Now you see where he's going with trying to give them rest. And you remember Matthew 11:28-30, "Come to me and I will give you rest." I could see that all souls were covered with a mantle of disturbance, struggle, and restlessness. Some were falling into sin and remained saddened. Some were dominated by tyrannical passions, which they wanted to conquer and remained disturbed. Some wanted to do good and struggled in order to do it. In other words, there was no peace. Because true peace is possessed when the will of the person returns into the will of its creator. That's where you find peace, when our will goes back into his. That's when the struggle stops. Outside of the centre, dislocated from its origin, there is no peace. Therefore, while sleeping, my humanity laid itself over all, wrapping them as though within a mantle. Just like the hen, that's Luke 13:34. Just like the hen when it calls its chicks under its maternal wings to make them sleep. In the same way, extending over all, I called all of my children under my wings to give some forgiveness of sin, to some victory over their passions, and to some strength in the fight, to give peace and rest to everyone. And in order not to strike fear in them, but to give them courage, I did this while I was sleeping. I think that's absolutely gorgeous. I think that's absolutely magnificent. His gentleness, his delicacy, it's just amazing. Just like a parent would do anything not to frighten a little child. And so they will operate very quietly if the child needs to sleep. It's beautiful. I did it while I was sleeping, he said. Who would fear someone who is sleeping? Now, the world hasn't changed, unfortunately. Rather, it has more struggles than ever before. And therefore, I want someone who sleeps in my will. You see, sin hasn't decreased, it has multiplied. The earth is sunk into vice that I don't know if it has ever been this bad before. And the reason why I say that is not that others wouldn't have committed the same sins, but now it's global. It's not confined to one area or one country or one tribe or one people. It's actually global. That's why I think it's worse. Sodom and Gomorrah is no longer just two little cities near the Dead Sea. It's worldwide. And he wants others to sleep in the divine will now, which I think is fantastic. Therefore, I want someone who sleeps in my will, so as to repeat the effects of the sleep of my humanity. So when we go to bed and sleep in the divine will, we're sleeping with his sleep, and therefore he is continuing to do that wonder of helping humanity to find rest. Isn't that wonderful to be saving the world while you're sleeping? And then with an afflicted tone he said, my other children, where are they? Why don't they all come to me to receive rest and peace? So there's your Matthew 11:28 again. Let us call them together, he said. And it seemed that Jesus would call them by name one by one. Now that's John 10, verses 2 to 5. I know my sheep, I am the good shepherd, I call each one of them by name. But few actually hear, and fewer still respond. So let's go to December the 25th, 1921, how the humanity of Jesus was nourished by his will. And the souls who live in the divine will surrounded and consoled Jesus at his birth. So Luisa said, as I was in my usual state, my sweet Jesus made himself seen as a little baby, all numb with cold, and throwing himself into my arms, he told me, what cold, what cold? Warm me for pity's sake. Do not let me freeze any more. I pressed him to my heart, telling him, in my heart I possess your will, and its heat is more than sufficient to warm you. And Jesus, all content, said, my daughter, my will does contain everything. And one who possesses the divine will can give me everything. This is extremely important. Those who possess the divine will can give me everything. My will was everything for me. You know that John's Gospel is full of Jesus' statements about the will of the Father. Let me give you John 5:30, John 6:40, John 7:16, John 8:28 and 29, John 10:29 and 38, John 12:49 and 50, and John 14:31. It's full of statements about my food is to do the will of the Father, is in chapter John 4:34, and starting there it goes on right through. It's magnificent. My will was everything for me, he said. It conceived me, it formed me, it made me grow, it made me be born. If my mother contributed to giving me the blood, she could do so because she contained my will absorbed within her. Had she not possessed my will, she could not have contributed to forming my humanity. Why? Because nothing unholy or unworthy can enter the presence of God. That's Hebrews 12:14, that you know off by heart by now. Therefore, my direct will, now that's the will of the three divine persons, and my will which was absorbed within my mother gave me life. In other words, the Blessed Trinity said, I want it. That's it. That which is human had no power over me. Do you remember that Jesus said that in John 19 to Pilate? You would have no power over me if it wasn't given to you from above. So if the divine will had not permitted you to be in this place, in this job right now, you would have nothing to do with me, nothing whatever. That which is human had no power over me. It could give me nothing. Naturally, a creature could give nothing to the Creator. Only the divine will nourished me, and its breath, with its breath, that's the Holy Spirit, and delivered me to the light. Now, we know from discoveries that were made by Ron Wyatt, and you'll find his stuff on YouTube if you want. Ron Wyatt has gone back to God some years ago, that he found drops of the blood of Jesus in the place at Calvary where the cross was put into the hole. He actually found the hole where the cross was put, and there was still some blood there, and he had it analysed. And the extraordinary thing is that he insisted on the scientists in Israel examining it. He did not tell them what it was, but he told them it was an extremely important thing, and they were to treat it with the utmost caution. When he went back to inquire, they said, who owns this blood? He said, what do you mean? They said it's alive. This blood is alive. That's what scientists have discovered when they have examined blood stains on the Holy Eucharist as well. They've said this blood is alive. And not only that, they said, there's only one set of chromosomes. Everybody has to have two sets of chromosomes, one from the male and one from the female. And Ron Wyatt said to them, and he was speaking to Jews who were not Christians, he said, that's the blood of your Messiah. He told you that God was his Father. He got an absolutely massive reaction from them, crying and weeping and everything. Jesus said that it was only the divine will that nourished him, was his very breath, and delivered him to the light. Because we know that he was born miraculously. He was not born in the way all others are born. But do you think that it was the cold of the air that made me freeze? Because if it was the cold of the air, then you'd worry that Blessed Mother and Joseph hadn't taken care of him properly and hadn't wrapped him in swaddling clothes. They did absolutely everything for him that they could do. So the freezing and the cold that he's talking about is not physical. Ah, no, he said, it was the cold of the hearts that made me grow numb. It was the ingratitude that made me cry bitterly. On my very first coming out into the light, my beloved mother soothed my crying, although she too cried. Our tears blended together, and exchanging the first kisses, we poured ourselves out in love to each other, understood. But our life was to be sorrow and crying from the cradle to the grave. Our life was to be sorrow and crying, so I had her place me in the manger, to go back to crying, calling my children with my sobs and with my tears. So here you have Jesus interceding for souls, and he only just out of his mother's womb, interceding in the crib. If only we would tell children the truth, they would all be saints, every one of them. So I had her place me in a manger to go back to crying, calling my children with my sobs and with my tears. I wanted to move them to pity with my tears and with my moans, so as to be listened to. Surely you would listen to an infant. But do you know who was the first after my mother, whom I called with my tears to be close to me in my very manger, to pour myself out in love? He said, it was you, Luisa. Because we only look at things on a material level. We have to understand that he's God. And everything in the divine will is just one single point. There's neither past nor future in it. Everything is present. So he said, I called you, Luisa, the little daughter of my will. You were so little as to surpass my dear mother in littleness, so much so that I was able to keep you near me in my own manger. Now, when you listen to her meditations elsewhere on the time of Jesus in his mother's womb and his birth, she talks about getting into the manger. She even talks about getting into the womb beside Jesus. I was able to keep you near me in my own manger, and I could pour my tears into your heart. These tears sealed my will in you and constituted you the legitimate daughter of my will. There's yours, Romans 8:19 again. My heart rejoiced in seeing what my will had delivered in creation coming back to you as whole in my will. This was important and indispensable for me. At my very first coming out to the light of this world, I was to restore the rights of creation and receive the glory as if the creature had never departed from my will. Therefore, the first kiss and the first gifts of my tenderest age were for you. And I just say, what love, what incredible love. Do any of us know God? It's just utterly amazing. So Luisa said, my love, how could this be, if at that time I didn't even exist? And so here's the answer. Jesus said, in my will, everything existed, and all things were one single point for me. This is the singularity. This is the utter, unbelievable simplicity of God. So all of us have been known and loved eternally. No wonder he said in Jeremiah 31:3, I have loved you with an everlasting love, and I am constant in my affection for you. We've been loved eternally. We weren't just loved on the cross. We weren't just loved during the adult life of Jesus. We've been loved eternally. He went through the whole process of incarnation because of us. It's a terrifying mystery. In my will, everything existed, and all things were one single point for me. I could see you then, just as I see you now. And Jesus also says he saw us all from the cross. And all the graces I've given you are nothing other than the confirmation of what you had been given ab eternal, from all eternity. Isn't that amazing? And I could see not only you, but in you I saw my little divine will family, which would live in my will. So through Luisa, who was to open up this whole kingdom of the divine will, he could see all of us who would follow her. How content I felt, he said. These soothed my crying, warmed me, and surrounded me like a crown, and defended me from the perfidy of other creatures. The perfidy is the absolute refusal to even acknowledge that he exists. So Luisa said she remained pensive and doubtful, and Jesus said, what? You doubt it? I've told you nothing yet about the relations which exist between me and the soul who lives in my will. We are only on volume 13. When we get to volume 18, we'll be halfway there. So he's right in saying, I've told you nothing yet. For now, I will tell you that my humanity lived from the continuous outpouring of the divine will. Had I taken even one breath which was not animated by the divine will, it would have been as though degrading and disennobling for myself. The soul who lives in my will is the closest to me. What do you think? Holiness is only closeness to God. And in everything that my humanity did and suffered, she is the first among all to receive the fruits and the effects that it contains. And I have Matthew 19:30 there. So the soul who lives in the divine will is first among all, of course, because if all the others are either living in the human will or even worse, of course you're first. That means you're ahead of them. But you have to be first in love, and you have to be first in self-sacrifice, and you have to be first in encompassing all the others to bring them to him. Because love is not satisfied with just having it by itself. It wants all the others as well. So I'm going to stop there for now.